Morning everyone and welcome to our session this morning. Can everybody hear me okay? This session is going to be chaired today by Helena Roulston. I hope I pronounced that right, Helena. And I'll be handing over to her very shortly. We offer you a very warm welcome on behalf of CHELG. We hope you enjoy our session today. So without further ado, I hand over to Helena. Have a great session. I'll see you later.
Thank you, David. Yes, again, it's good to see everybody. I'm Helena Roulston and I'm the coordinating chaplain at Sheffield Hallam University. For a moment then I forgot which university I was at. I was looking at all your universities. I don't know where I am anymore. Yeah, I just want to, I'll quickly just go through all of our panelists and just to introduce you to them, and then I will pass on to our first panelist, which is Richard Davey, who is a coordinating chaplain at Nottingham Trent University. And then we will hear from Jeremy Clines, coordinating chaplain at the University of Sheffield. They're very close to me. And then last, we will hear from Robin Fishwick, coordinating chaplain at Universities Chaplaincy in Leeds, and he's also the Quaker rep on the CHELG exec. So we'll have 5 minutes from all of our panelists, and I'm going to pass over to Richard.
Thanks, Helena. Thanks, it's really good to be here. So as Helena said, I'm Richard Davey. I'm the coordinating chaplain at Nottingham Trent University. I've been there for 16 years. This is the beginning of my 17th year at Trent. And over those years, I've seen huge amounts of changes in the work I do. I've always headed up, as part of my work, the pastoral response to a student death. But there was, for many years, very little other bereavement work. I'd occasionally get a referral in, often to be associated with, this person's got some faith, could you talk to them? There was a trickle rather than a flood. But then 4 years ago, there was a kind of major shift in the university's approach to faith. And that came, I think, primarily out of the prevent question that was asked of universities about 4 or 5 years ago: is your university chaplaincy adequate and appropriate? The response from Trent was to, rather than appointing me full-time, I'm paid by the churches, appointing me as coordinating chaplain and paying for that role, they appointed a multi-faith manager. And what that has meant over the last 4 years is that we now have a faith and chaplaincy team at Trent, where faith and the advocacy for faith is the role and work of my colleague Clive Foster, and chaplaincy, which I head up, is now focused on pastoral care, on community building, and on spiritual provision. So anything from meditation through Roman Catholic Mass to quiet prayer spaces. That has had a major impact, because in the past, where counsellors or members of staff would kind of say, well, if you've got faith, we'll refer you to the chaplains. Now they don't, they see faith looked after by the faith team, and chaplaincy is there for everybody, as we always say it is. And that has had a massive impact on the work I do, and particularly around bereavement. So in the last full year before this academic year, so the 2018-19 academic year, I had 160 referrals on students who've been bereaved, and I spoke to and saw 130 students. I also head up, as I said, I still head up the student death protocols pastoral provision. So there are 2 of us who look after the university's death protocol. And again, in 2018-19, we had 10 student deaths. Last academic year, there were 7. And that takes up a huge amount of work, from talking to parents and be the person who's talking to the parents, talking to the students who've been affected, talking to staff, putting on memorial services, arranging online books of condolence, and just being there supporting. The other thing which has happened is that we're linked to a better wellbeing provision, so that each school has a student support advisor. we also have wellbeing officers who now, rather than saying, well, if you want to talk to somebody, you can talk to our chaplain, here are the contact details, they'll now say, would you like me to contact them? And so I get an email and I can email the student back. And that's why instead of hardly any take up, I now get a kind of 80–90% take up, because what students who've been bereaved want is somebody reaching out to them rather than being told to go and reach out themselves. So there's been a huge change in the way that, one, chaplaincy is perceived, two, the way in which we're referred into. And part of that, as I said, is because of multi-faith, is the multi-faith manager. Part of it is because of a decision on my part to say, as chaplains, we are professionals in this area. If you want to find somebody who is more professional in the area of death and bereavement and grief, you would be hard pushed. We have expertise reaching from people being told that they are facing death with given a severe diagnosis, through to being there at the time of death, through being there after death, through funerals. And that gives us a unique, I believe, insight. And it's that professionalism, again, which I used not to assume they knew, which I'm now really keen to say, as chaplains, we need to advocate for, to say we're there. And finally, just the other thing which we're doing is working with the Good Grief Trust, who are a national organisation who were behind the National Grief Awareness Week, which started last year. It's taking place again this year in December, from the 2nd to the 8th of December. And they hold Good Grief pop-up cafes. And we've started to do our own version of that, working with Linda Magistris, who heads up the Good Grief Trust. And those have been really useful as kind of group events. So I think there is a real role that as chaplains we can play, and we need to be more professional. We need to be out there, not just relying on people coming to us when there is a need. And I think that's everything I want to say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for a really helpful pointers and encouragement about how we can really encourage people to highlight chaplaincy and bereavement. And I'm going to pass over now to Jeremy Clines, coordinating chaplain at the University of Sheffield.
Thanks, Helena, and thanks to Sarah for helping set this up, and for David for your welcome, and Helena for chairing, and Richard, your insights are really interesting. And I just want to note how important Septembers often have been for us as higher education chaplains. Historically, we often did have our annual conference at this time of year, and just to listen to one another and to reflect together and to network, especially for any who are newly started. I also want to, I don't know who you are, but if you are recently started, a really warm welcome to the network. And it's just fantastic that we do have CHELG here facilitating these frequent webinars as a way for us to be connected and supported, because it's been a crucial part of being a chaplain for me for all the many years that I've been doing it. And I can't emphasize enough how special it is, and how we can all instantly learn some good practice and exemplars of practice from one another quickly. I know that's not the topic, but I just think that as year begins, it's really important to note that, especially for some of us who might be thinking, this is hard, or I can't begin all over again if we've been doing this year by year, or I'm new and how do I connect? So that's the most important thing, but that sort of resonates with how we set up grief support and how we've worked on that and bereavement support at Sheffield and a university, and why we've expanded that this year because of COVID-19. So we have felt that people accessing us for bereavement support, I've been listening carefully to what Richard was saying. I think there's more things that we can do, especially because we both have a new wellbeing service at the University of Sheffield, and we're connecting with them in lots of ways. But we've had a long-term central welfare and guidance team who have dealt with a lot of the critical incidents so they can call chaplaincy in. What we have designed and co-designed with the University Counselling Service and with others was peer-to-peer support groups facilitated by chaplains to supplement the one-to-one work that we do. And the peer-to-peer support groups for those who have been bereaved, we run for staff and we run for students. And when we run them for students, we ask students range of options on title, and they went for good grief ! Because that's what they wanted. And staff said they didn't want that in general from the feedback we got. So we just called them grief support group, I think, though that's changed this year. So back to that in a minute. So why we offer peer-to-peer support groups was because we found that people were deeply encouraged by coming to talk to a chaplain, as Richard was saying, because we've got professional expertise, but that there's something about building friendship, and or if not building friendship, at least finding solidarity with others who are in the same boat. Because sometimes a university can feel like many other workplaces, an inhospitable space when you feel you've been thrown into a very solitary, life-changing journey like grief. And to meet others who are in another office or in another department who are making that solo journey just build solidarity in a way that's special, as we know with all sorts of peer-to-peer support groups. But they go down incredibly well, and we run 6 to 8 student support groups and 8 to 10 staff support groups for about an average of 6 people a time. We try not to let it ever get beyond 8. We prefer 5 to 7. That's an ideal number we find for peer-to-peer support groups. We run them 3 times for a group. A group exists for 3 weeks, 1-hour sessions happening 3 times. And we find that's enough for people to sustain in terms of their calendar or diary, if they're staff, or their timetable as students. It's hard to sustain it for longer. And sometimes 3 weeks is a challenge enough. Happening, obviously 3 weeks is actually over a 15-day period, because the first one's on day 1, day 8, day 15, you see what I mean. And the structure of the group is set the same each time, which is that the first group has a soft theme of telling our story. The second session has the soft theme of when it's harder and when it's easier, or coping and not coping, but we esteem the fact that coping and not coping are both intrinsic parts of the grief process and bereavement. Not that one's better or worse, but we're trying to help comfort people, but reassure them that that's the deal, so let's be honest about it. And the third session, after the second session of coping, not coping, the third session, we have the loose theme of things we'd like to change or do differently. And sometimes that's arising from the group conversation or what's inspired them from one another. The facilitator doesn't say very much at all, but the facilitator says they will offer any wisdom, insights, or signposting to relevant resources or other support workers. So sometimes it's quite clear that therapeutic assistance for traumatic grief might need to be referenced, but we do it very sensitively, obviously, in a group setting. We advertise this by, we have the privilege of being able to send out block emails to all staff or all students to promote these groups. And we found that uptake has increased. And so we started by doing about 3 or 4 student groups and 2 staff groups a year. That was about 5 years ago. And now we're up to many more because of the demand. And we try and flex the demand, and we try and run them at different times of day. I think I've said enough for now, except that staff tend to like a first thing in the morning before the working day, though that also does mean it's very hard for them to go into their office space afterwards. But we still find there's the preference for that. Students much prefer, on average, meeting at lunchtime or mid-afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy. I'm going to pass over to Robin, now coordinating chaplain at Universities Chaplaincy in Leeds and Quaker representative on CHELG at Sept.
Nearly forgets to unmute himself. Hello, everyone. I have noticed that my colleague Melvin Kelly is here today, and he's going to be fed up of me saying this, but a few years ago when we were welcoming Melvin to our team, there was a licensing service, and as part of that, it fell to me to describe the role of the university chaplain. And one of the phrases I came up with, which has stuck with me ever since, was the phrase ambassadors of eternity. That's one of the roles of a chaplain, is to be an ambassador in eternity. One thing which chaplains all have in common, whether they're prison chaplains or hospital chaplains or university chaplains, is that they are carrying out their ministry in a particular specific context. But within that specific context, we're also bringing in something of eternity, something of the eternal. Richard said at the start of this that we are the professionals in this matter, in bereavement support. And I wanted us to look at, one of the aspects which makes us particularly suited to offer support in this. And that is our focus on the eternal, focusing on a God who has a beyondness of time. I think sometimes we shy away from that particular bit of theology. It's easier to focus on a God who is alongside us in time and is every bit as surprised as we are by what's around the corner. But to be aware of the fact that God is transcendent of time can often be very helpful when we're dealing with specific crises or trying to inculcate a sense of mindfulness. For example, when there is a student bereavement, there is a way by the institution will see this as an interruption in the flow. But that in that interruption in the flow, the bereaved students, the peers of a student who's died, for example, will be brought up against the big truths of life, of the fact that our lives are finite, and yet there are people who seem to witness to something which is beyond this finite life. And that's why it's quite important for us to be aware of that. But there are other aspects of this sort of focusing on eternity which actually helps in the much more mundane context of pastoral support. One is a sense that students can sometimes feel that they have not reacted to a death appropriately in the time which was allotted to them. I wasn't able to get to my granddad's funeral. I wasn't able to say this to the person. And within our ministry, we can be providing context within which we can say, you can say these things. With God, nothing is too late. You can pray for the soul of somebody, even though they have already died, because God will feel that prayer before they ever even lived. So that's something which I've been sort of looking at quite a bit in recent years. It is looking at how focusing on the eternal, how focusing on the timelessness of God can help us in our ministry. How our universities see us is about how we slot in. We are there, we give pastoral support, we build communities, we provide some faith. But when we're looking at the eternal and the focusing on the eternal, we're looking at where we stand out. As Richard says, this is the sort of thing which makes us the professionals in this field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That seems to be a good place to stop and reflect. And as Sarah mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. So we've now got a time of Q&A. I've just got question for each one of our panelists in turn. That's the advantage of being chair, is that I can put my questions through first. Richard, a question for you. You mentioned there's been a substantial increase in terms of supporting students who are going through bereavement. What would you say would be the one tip in terms of encouraging staff in the university to recognise the support that chaplaincy can give for bereavement care?
That's a really difficult one, but because what I've learned is sometimes it comes from, it's word of mouth of, that somebody who's benefited, who's seen the benefit of the conversation that a student or member staff has had with me, it will then say to somebody else, actually, Richard's a good person to speak to. So you can't beat that kind of word of mouth, that kind of depth of experience, the kind of presence that people get to trust you that you can do this. I certainly, the student support advisors and the wellbeing team meet regularly, and a couple of years ago I went to probably their first meeting of the term, and I just explained what I did, and I just emphasized again and again, I'm not just here, I barely talk about God. It's absolutely there within everything I'm thinking and doing, but it's not the language I'm kind of using on the surface, as it were, and except when it's appropriate, and often it is appropriate, but I'm not putting it. And it was them hearing it from me, I think, if that makes sense, that kind of helped other, many of them who kind of had never heard me say that. I might have written it, but they needed to hear. And again, it's about hearing. It's about that, because the work we do is so personal, it's about conversation. They need to have the conversation with us to hear what we do, rather than just the piece of paper which says this is what chaplaincy offers. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Jeremy, you spoke about the bereavement groups, which was really, really good to hear. I wonder if you could tell us about how they've gone during the time when we've gone virtual, and have you been doing groups virtually, and if so, how have you found them unsatisfactory or satisfactory?
Yeah, thanks, Helena. And we'll all have many different experiences, and I know that we're going into smaller groups to discuss as well, because there's different voices on this, so this is just our experience. But we both had to switch. We were in the middle of groups which were face-to-face, and then the university had to leave its own premises, so we then continued. So we went video call, and when we refined that offer during those first few months of lockdown, first of all, we didn't offer groups just for bereavement support, but we offered it for life change, for isolation, and for loss more generally. And so we had different types of group on offer, and actually the isolation and life change offer blended together very well, and we did run a few groups like that. What was unsatisfactory, well, let me say one thing that was very satisfactory is that this is part of what the chaplaincy can offer to people, whether or not they have a clear religion or belief identity. It's an equal offer to everybody. It's not about talking about God, but obviously talking about religion or belief identity in the group is welcomed, like talking about any intersectional element of one's identity. And we're pleased to offer that because it's about providing a more equal provision from what can be seen as the religious bit of the university. So that, I think that's important in terms of equality and inclusion, that we're not offering an exclusionary support group. What's difficult about doing it online is it's very hard for people to read each other's body language. For some people, it just isn't going to work in that environment to spill very personal information to strangers from different departments or from different courses. We did try timing the sessions 4 days apart to try and build a bit more connection between people, because that's one of the objectives, is to help people get to know each other and mutually agree if they so wish to stay in touch afterwards. And we just felt video meetings might be better round a shorter term timeline. So we did it on day 1, 5 and 8, 9, I guess it is the numbers. 1, 5, 9, rather than 1, 8, 15. Kind of worked, but people's circumstances changed so quickly in lockdown. It was proving harder to run 3 sessions which everybody could come to. But overall, we're looking this autumn to try and offer both some face-to-face once we've got through all the risk assessments for that, and some online, but we'd have a strong preference towards face-to-face.
Okay, yeah.
Can I just interrupt there, Helena? Because I've also done the Good Grief Cafes and done it nationally. And one of the feedbacks, not to contradict what Jamie says, but one of the feedbacks that the National Good Grief Zoom cafes, which have been taking place 3 times a week for the last 6 months, is that actually Zoom works very well for people who are anxious about crying or showing their emotions in front of other people, because they can turn the camera off, they can have the microphone off, and yet still participate. They can listen, they can hear, and that's something which has actually had some real benefits. So I totally agree with you, Jeremy. I think it needs to be both, but there is advantage in the Zoom online, where you can actually turn the camera off, particularly with people who are really affected.
Yes, I think because we're on a peer-to-peer support model, it was that we're trying to facilitate people to support one another.
Yeah.
And that can be hard when they're in the room. It doesn't always, we help people choose very carefully whether they really want to go into a group support chat. And whether it's online or in the room, it's hard in different ways.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to move us on to another question from Christopher Taylor. I'm going to ask this for Robin. How do you feel about the idea that chaplains are the ones who give permission to grieve and explain that grief happens in different ways and that there is no wrong way to grieve, just there is no right way? Obviously, there are unhelpful ways of grieving, but chaplains are, as accompanists, can mitigate that. So, question for Robin there.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much, Chris. Nice to hear from you. Yes, I think it is very important, and I think that is something which says something about the relationship or the potential relationship between the chaplain and or the staff or member or student, and that is it should be a relationship in which a person will be held no matter what. And I'm thinking not just about grief in a way, but last week was World Suicide Prevention Day, and we put out a message from the chaplaincy about this. And part of that message was saying that you can be vulnerable, and it's helpful to find people you can be vulnerable with. And it can be a chaplain, or it can be somebody else. But as chaplains, we certainly should be putting across the message to people that there is no right or wrong way of grieving. There is no there shouldn't be anything which you are afraid to say to a chaplain. And even if that is something like anger at God, to be able to sort of provide a safe space in which somebody can express that anger can help them work through it. So I think we have to be unshockable in a way, and I think we also have to be encouraging people to be as honest and angry and vulnerable and broken as they feel they are. I think when I was a student, one of my biggest regrets is that although I knew my chaplains, I didn't sort of open up to them about my failures where I wasn't doing well at university. And I think if I had done, it would have helped.
Thank you very much. I'm going to, I've given the task to Richard of the next question, answering it in 1 minute, because we're running rapidly out of time. And I think it was Tina's question. I would like to hear about the experiences of any of supporting the angry grieving student who wonders where God, if there is one, was in the suffering and death of their beloved one. 1 minute, there you go, Richard. Short and sweet.
I just want to very quickly change that, because I rarely get students asking that question. It's the parents I get asking that question when I'm talking to parents after they've had their 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old beloved son or daughter die, and that's where you really get it. I rarely get it from students, and I just suppose the only way I do that, I don't try and answer that question. I am there as the punching bag. I'm there to kind of say, I don't know either. I don't have the answers. What I can do is, in a sense, in that, in the footprints model, I can try and walk alongside you, but actually, without you realizing it, try and carry some of the weight of that pain. I can think of a horrendous situation we had when we had 2 students killed in a car crash going over the Woodhead Pass in the Peak District, and the mother of one ultimately, attempted suicide 8 times, and the father had cancer, and the cancer was, and he was screaming at me, how could God do this? And in the end, he said, thank you for not trying to answer that, Richard. That I could see, it wasn't, he didn't say explicitly, I can see actually there is an answer by you being there, but the answer for him was, thank you for not trying to answer that question, but just by being there and listening to the pain and holding me when it was that painful. So yeah, that's all I can do. That's my response.
Yeah, I think there's something very powerful in that, and I think I've had a similar, I'm sure we all, many of us have had similar experiences in that, that sometimes not answering those questions is the best answer and the most uplifting answer in the long term that we can give. I noticed we have run out of time for the Q&A. There are questions on the chat, and I've checked with Sarah. We'll follow them up with an email in response to all participants. So we will follow up the questions that are coming up on the chat. I'm going to pass over now to David, who's going to talk about breakout rooms. Each of us were asked to have one point from our breakout rooms. So I think the best thing to do would be to go through each room, starting at the beginning, ending it with 8. So breakout number room 1.
Yes, I was in that group. I'm Yvonne from the University of Derby, Buxton campus, and we had a great discussion about how much we should link religion, religious figures, God, to this bereavement, to this appalling thing that people are going through with all the maelstrom of emotions and bewilderment and all sorts of things. And I think people seem to feel that perhaps it would be a real way forward to listen to the person, and at some point to say, would you like me? Would you like me to pray for you or to pray for them? And then to build on whatever the response was. I mean, I don't mean we should just sort of, insist on getting that question in straight away, but at some point in the conversation, it would be appropriate. If that point hasn't presented itself, then to do it at the end, as we're saying goodbye and wishing them well, and that would give an introduction to really bringing the eternal into the here and now.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Breakout number 2, room number 2.
Yep. So that was our group, and We have 3 short points. One was really the difficulty and sensitivity of offering support when the bereaved person is in senior management, and looking at just how that can be a little bit difficult and requires a certain sensitivity. So that was an issue we were concerned about. The other one that came up was the GDPR issue, that sometimes student support might use that, or someone might use that as a way of saying you can't share certain information. So we have to be quite clear about what we can and can't share, what we can and can't do. And that's why we had a very useful input from Gregory Wellington, which is in the chat. Just, it's a place where you can check what the rules actually are. And then the third point was this issue of chaplains processing their own responses to bereavement and making sure that if they are touched by something, that it's not conflicting with the work they're doing as a chaplain. So they were our 3 points.
Thank you so much, Helen. And where are you coming from, Helen?
You mean geographically?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I'm in Lincoln.
Ah, good. Say hello to Lincoln for me. So breakout room number 3. Do we have a spokesperson for breakout room number 3?
That would be Rosina.
Muting. Sorry, it's Rosina in Cambridge from Anglia Ruskin University. Apologies. I think that we also went through a few key points, and for me, they kind of weave into each other one way or the other, and I'll just try to kind of deliver them in one flow as a sentence. We spoke about our role as ambassadors of eternity, which is something that we need to be a little bit more confident in putting across. And I think one sentence that a panel member came across with or put forward, which kind of should strike us all in the heart, is that God doesn't put eternity in our hearts in order to disappoint us. And so I am aware that this will resonate with somebody who is maybe already fully spiritual, but this is something that we shouldn't be too afraid and to pass over at the right time in the subtle way that the Holy Spirit will enable us to put across as well as people journey on that path. And that is key to our role, though it may not always be trendy to put it across, but you know, we can't avoid being representatives of what we are supposed to be in that sense. And also, I think they fit together because the prayer of having something to say to somebody who is no longer there, I think resonates with everybody, whether or not they are Christian. And so to open that forum to say, you can say whatever you wish to say, everything you say, you know, from our point of view will be prayer. From your own point of view, you can call it conversation, but it is, that forum is open, it's not limited. And so it's ongoing. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Rosina. Breakout room number 4.
I'm reporting from breakout room number 4. We had people from a variety of places around the country, but we, while unknown what exactly our task was in the group, we reached 2 conclusions. One, which was that we thought that better communication with the university was a good thing for our various chaplaincies to pursue, because to varying levels, we don't always hear about staff or student deaths. And so to make sure those contacts happen. And we wondered if the increasing level of professionalization across the university led to that, because folks who were not chaplains, but who saw bereavement as part of their remit didn't want their remit to disappear.
Yeah.
And so we thought we needed to pursue that, but sensitively. The other was that we talked about, most of us didn't run groups like that were spoken of, but had other ways of dealing. And one of the upcoming opportunities is all of the All Saints, All Souls Remembrance, beginning of November, provide some opportunities to do that, and how we might do that, and in ways that perhaps could include some of the sort of generalized pandemic anxiety over mortality, especially perhaps, though maybe not at the beginning of November, as people think about the term end and going home, wanting to protect family members who may have been isolated while students were perhaps not isolating so well at university. And so, you know, how do you love thy neighbor? How do you protect Granny?
Yeah, thank you, Mindy. Breakout room number 5 was ours, and I've got some notes here. So there was questions around how people are responding to support people, those who are bereaved and grieving. That will be an interesting thing to share. And the other thought that came from the group was that we were reflecting over the last few months that there'd been multiple things that we've been putting on or offering through chaplaincy, reminding people that chaplaincy is there for bereavement support, which has gone down really well in terms of other staff within the university. It almost has felt like it's released an anxiety about whether there's any bereavement support. We can be able to offer that. But what we have seen is that the uptake of that bereavement support hasn't been many, so it's an interesting sort of reflection about sort of the comfort of the anxiety of the university, that we offer that bereavement support, but interesting to see that it's been relatively few people who have been coming forward for that support. Breakout room number 6.
Yeah, that would be me representing group 6. Thank you everyone, and thank you in particular to group 6. My name is Ingrid Ims and I am student chaplain for Norwegian students in the UK and Ireland, and I work for the Norwegian Church Abroad, and I'm in Greenwich, London at the moment. What we wanted to bring out, one of the things we talked about in the group is that we are actually seeing a broadening of the agenda when it comes to bereavement and grief, that it's not only, you know, like we've experienced before, death and grief and bereavement in all the ways we know, but it's also this grief about losing out. New students that are coming to university, also students who are continuing, are actually, or even students who are doing all their studies from home, they are losing out in a very special and difficult way. And we were talking about how many students are really trying hard to cope with that, you know, in a way maturing before their time, as it were. And I think, well, we talked about this losing out and the grief that many, I do believe, are feeling about being isolated in a different way, particularly now when Precious Weeks are starting. Yeah.
Thank you, Ingrid. We've got a couple more left. We are right over time, so I'm just going to quickly move on to breakout room number 7.
That's ours. I'm Stephanie. I'm at Keele near Stoke. Just very quickly, we talked a bit about giving people permission to grieve in whatever way that they are grieving, that people often don't really understand or feel guilty about grieving in different ways. We talked about the importance of the loss of a pet, which can have a bigger impact day to day than the loss of a relative, and is something that a lot of people experience very significantly. And we talked about how do you take that person's life with you, about not allowing their death in speaking to a bereaved person, helping them not to allow the death and the loss to be the only thing that kind of dominates their thoughts of that person, but to know how they're going to celebrate that person going forward and taking that with them. And Richard used the example of being quite bold with a bereaved parent in saying, well, if you had known before your child was born that you would only have them for 20 years or whatever, would you still want them? And of course the parent would say yes. So thinking about ways to celebrate what they had rather than what they've lost was a challenge and a powerful message. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stephanie. And finally, breakout room number 8.
Yeah, I'm the spokesperson. Hi to everyone, my name's Stephen Wang. I'm Catholic priest. I'm the Catholic chaplain at London School of Economics and the coordinating chaplain for Westminster Diocese, my home diocese here in central London. Just we had a great discussion. I'm very grateful for all the input that others had given in the panel. So not to repeat all that, but the new things that came out were the confidence to be chaplains and not just part of well-being when that's helpful and appropriate. The huge amount of pressure that academic staff are under, obviously, but particularly because of all the demands on having to do hybrid videos and presentations, and many of them feeling vulnerable. The grief that's very real for so many students and staff, but also this phrase, the vicarious grief, the way that the anxiety of the last 6 months is being internalized, and to recognize there's a lot of tensions between people, some feeling that everyone's overreacting, some feeling that people are unreacting, and so that's creating tensions in some of our communities. And just a lovely thought from one of our panel about we need to use videos and to recognize that we're not all great at media, but to be brave enough to say we want to get better as a team rather than just running away from it and leaving it to other people to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you everyone for those thoughts and reflections, some really, really useful points that have come out there, and lots to take away to think about. I think I'm passing over now to David.
Yep. Well, this is it. This is almost the end. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you very much to our speakers, Robin Fishwick, Richard Davey, Jeremy Clines. Thank you to Helena for chairing, for Sarah Farrow to be our techie in the background, making sure it all happens. And thank you all for spending time with us, sharing and thinking. As has been expressed in the chat messages, if you are a newbie, let us know, and so we can better help, support and encourage you. If you're not a newbie, but want help and support over particular issues, even these ones, please let us know by email and we'll see what we can do. And I just want to finish by saying that we have got some space for social groups. Is that correct, Sarah? So if you want to carry on talking, you want to carry on listening, you want to carry on being part of this, we have the capacity to do that. But after that statement, thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful day. God bless. Bye-bye.